Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for getting here on time. Amazing. I love it. You're doing better than I am. So if we could take a break for just a minute away from some food, I know that's going to get me in big trouble, and also from drinks, just have a little attention here tonight. We are honored tonight to be joined by the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. For me, this relationship started in 2014 when President Obama's team asked me to move from HUD to USDA. I arrived at USDA and was immediately struck by the lack of attention to the programs we were working on and the lack of understanding between the affordable housing colleagues that I had had for years. My new department was originating tens of billions of dollars a year in mortgages. We had a portfolio of over $200 billion in debt. And yet, the affordable housing industry was not paying nearly enough attention to the programs we had and the work we were doing. Luckily, I knew a brilliant houser who was just coming down to the Fed named Eric Belsky, a friend from previous times, and I called him up and we started to talk through the issue, and of course he was one of the few who was familiar immediately with the nation's rural housing programs and recognized the lack of awareness that the community that we often worked with and the financial institutions and philanthropic entities needed to start to pay more attention to this geography, or we were going to have some significant issues continue to grow. Micropolitan centers, small towns needed that kind of attention. Together with one of his extraordinary Federal Reserve staffers, who I'm thrilled to see here tonight, Andrew Dumont. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your partnership. And some real help from Alan Fishbein at the Fed as well. We organized the Fed's first ever convening on rural housing. It was 2016. We convened our industry and we did our darnest to capture some attention for what we were witnessing in rural places. Much of that consciousness raising we did then is just as important today, a point that's marked by Chairman Powell being here to join us, his presence here tonight by joining us and sharing his thoughts on rural America and its importance to our nation's economy and the Federal Reserve System. We have once again an opportunity to bring awareness to the poorest places in the richest nation in the world. Chairman Powell was born and raised here in DC, got his law degree from our little local university across the way, Georgetown, and worked as a lawyer and investment banker in New York City. He was appointed as an assistant secretary and as an undersecretary of the Treasury by President George H.W. Bush, responsible for policy on financial institutions, Treasury and debt market, and much, much more. After serving Bush and the nation, Chairman Powell returned to investment banking in New York City, but came home again in DC 2010 to work at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Great for DC, great for BPC, and great for us to have him in town as President Obama reached over and said in 2011, I would love for you to serve on the Fed's Board of Governors. In 2012, he was confirmed, and that's the position from which President Trump elevated Chairman Powell in 2017. It is an extraordinary honor and great pleasure for HAC to welcome Chairman Jay Powell to the stage.
Thanks very much, David, and good evening, everyone. It's great to be here tonight. I'm sorry that you're standing. I feel like I'm making you stand, maybe keeping you from your dinner. And thanks to the Housing Assistance Council for inviting me to be part of this discussion about rural housing. I understand that you'll shortly be presenting awards to the people who are working at the local and national levels in both the public and private sectors and whose efforts have improved housing conditions for the rural poor. All of you who work in these roles are doing your country a great service by helping to advance economic opportunity in our communities. And I want to thank the award recipients for the difference you make, and all of you, for the difference you make in the lives of people every day in rural communities. Thank you. I'm happy to begin by reporting that our economy is currently performing very well overall, with strong job creation and gradually rising wages. The unemployment rate is 3.7%, the lowest since 1969. A strong job market has encouraged more people to participate in the labor market, another positive development. In fact, by many national level measures, our labor market is very strong. As those of you at this conference, though, are acutely aware, however, aggregate statistics can mask important variations between different demographic and income groups, as well as significant regional differences. For example, unemployment rates in some persistently poor rural counties remain much higher than national figures. The annual average employment rate in 2017 exceeded 10% in 27 persistently poor rural counties, and the rate was 20% or more in a couple of those counties. Recent Fed research has found that since 2007, labor force participation rates for those in their prime working years in rural areas have increasingly lagged behind those in urban areas. Labor force participation has been particularly low for those with only a high school diploma or less. Research has also found that business formation and employment growth during the recovery have been concentrated in large urban areas. So data and research findings like these remind us that despite positive trends in the national data, the benefits of the ongoing economic expansion are still not reaching some communities. Through our 12 reserve banks around the country and their branches, we're able to get a clearer picture of conditions in individual communities on the ground around the nation. Each of our 12 reserve banks has an active, well-staffed community development function, one of the great benefits of our unusual Federal Reserve structure. We get important and timely information on the state and local economic and financial conditions, including those affecting low and moderate income, as well as other underserved communities. And our community development staff provide us with a more nuanced understanding of current economic and financial conditions. They also actively help people in low income and underserved communities overcome the challenges they face. We support numerous initiatives in rural communities across the country, and I'd like to highlight three of those for you. The first initiative is at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis's longtime commitment to the Mississippi and Arkansas Delta region, a region that's struggled for decades with persistent intergenerational poverty and a lack of resources and capacity to address the challenge. Most recently, in 2016, the St. Louis Fed launched the Delta Communities Initiative, and since then has held 26 regional forums with more than 500 participants. These forums help to build awareness of promising tools and strategies for community and economic development. And we took a recent survey of participants, and that survey suggests that these forums are making a real difference. A second example is the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas's commitment to advancing digital inclusion in low-income rural communities. Despite significant effort and advances made by public, private, and nonprofit organizations in recent years, nearly 30% of rural households continue to lack access to broadband internet service. Fewer than half of households earning less than $20,000 per year have such service. In an increasingly digital economy, lack of access to high-speed internet and the knowledge of how to best make use of it limits the ability of families and entire communities to reach their full potential. To address this problem, the Dallas Fed has explored the role of the Community Reinvestment Act in addressing the digital divide, the potential for technology to bridge the urban-rural divide in access to health care, and the critical importance of preparing workers for the digital economy. Third and last, community development staff at the Federal Reserve Board and several reserve banks around the country have conducted research to better understand housing affordability challenges that affect rural communities nationwide, recognizing the importance of sufficient affordable housing to a community's economic vitality. Researchers found that, as in many urban areas nationwide, a large portion of renters in rural communities struggle to afford their rent, a finding that will come as a surprise to no one in this room, I suspect. Our staff also highlighted promising policy and practice solutions that have been implemented in some communities to try to address these challenges, including the establishment of dedicated funding for affordable housing and the elimination of exclusionary land use and zoning policies. While this type of research and community engagement work is a central component of our efforts to support rural areas, we also know that communities need resources and dedicated local partners to help implement many of the strategies involved. CRA has been an important tool for strengthening local community and economic development since it was enacted in 1977. We also recognize that significant changes in the financial services industry and the economy generally since then have hindered the law's effectiveness, especially in rural communities, and that an update of the implementing regulation is appropriate at this time. So as my colleague, Governor Brainerd, has noted, one of the principles guiding our CRA modernization work is that any redesign of CRA regulations should continue to encourage banks to seek opportunities in underserved areas, including rural communities. I understand that HAC has done considerable research and stakeholder engagement to shed light on the barriers to the effective use of CRA in rural communities. All of that work will benefit our reform efforts. The Fed's ongoing series of roundtable discussions in communities across the country will also allow us to hear suggestions for improving CRA from local stakeholders, including many people from rural communities. These perspectives will inform our deliberations on this critical regulation, and we will make a summary of our discussions available to the public, as always. In closing, while the economy is strong overall, we fully recognize that some communities have yet to feel the full benefits of the ongoing expansion. We're conducting research, collaborating with communities and groups, and assessing financial regulations so that our nation's current prosperity will benefit small towns and cities alike. The work being done by all of you, and by particularly tonight's award recipients, is critical to making progress toward that goal. So thank you for being our partners in this work. We look forward to continuing that, and I honor you greatly for the work you do in helping people across the country every day. Thank you very much.